Nicholas was drifting through a sea of pain. Though his mind was asleep and his body unconscious, he could still actually feel a ravaging agony that ripped through his essence. He almost felt as if everything he was, everything he could be, was being broken down, bit by bit, and forcibly reconstructed into some foreign monstrosity of the natural order. Dimly lucid, he wandered through an endless blackness, slowly losing, and then gaining, himself. His sense of awareness slowly being wrenched back to him, and over the course of what felt like days, the smell of the air and the feeling of cloth on his skin returned to him. Eventually, and with what felt like a Herculean effort, he opened his eyes. The room before him was dizzy and unclear, his vision blurred. Almost immediately, as he raised his head, he was beset by a pounding headache, and he felt as if he had awoken from a year-long slumber. Groggily, he shifted around in what he could now feel was definitely a bed, and tried to figure out just what exactly had happened to him. "Oh, you're finally awake!" A cheerful voice rang out to him that he could just barely make out was coming from a woman. She quickly shifted on the bed and got closer to him as he pushed her backwards. "Who are you and where am I?" he said as his vision started to clear, and he began to understand both the foreignness of this location and person. "You don't remember?" The woman, who he could now see in better detail, said, looking puzzled. She was a young girl, a full head shorter than he was, and dressed in a faintly aristocratic garb. He would have said she almost resembled a princess, if not for the fact that her dress was pure black, and amongst that light brown hair and delicate face, she held a pair of unnaturally red eyes. "Surely your memory hasn't left you for that long. It should have returned to you in under a minute," she said, noting the look he was giving her. As she spoke, it was as if a door was opened in his mind, and he was sent tumbling back to the events of yesterday. He remembered a woman. He was due for a publicity event at this small town in relation to a new film he was starring in there. She was just one of many in a crowd, but she felt so enchanting, mysterious in a way he was helplessly drawn to. He was supposed to stay at the publicity event for hours, and yet he followed her almost as soon as it started. It was very funny. He never heard her speak, and yet he knew exactly what she wanted perfectly without words. She was a fan, or so he felt, and she wanted to know all about why he chose to be an actor. He ended up opening up to her, in a far more personal way than he would have normally, openly letting his emotions flow out as if he tore open his chest and showed her plainly. He told her he loved acting, that he got to play so many different stories and live so many different lives. He got to taste the many different flavors of emotion and craft something to present to everyone on the stage. If he could, he would act forever, though he knew that was impossible. She seemed to audibly laugh as he said that, though. "You!" he shouted as the recollection firmly caught up to him. "It was like I was possessed. I followed your every whim. I was never even supposed to leave." He gripped his head as the headache momentarily got back to him. "It wasn't so bad," she responded casually, not seeming to understand the graveness of the situation. "You had an enjoyable time, right?" she said, trying to nudge closer to him, "and I granted you your wish." "My wish?" he mumbled in confusion, and then suddenly he remembered. He remembered it. A thing that sent a revolting chill up his spine as he desperately searched for a mirror. He found one quickly right on the bedstand, but to his horror, when he shined it on his face, he didn't see a single thing. Unconsciously, he went to touch his teeth and he felt the unmistakable shape of fangs. He now finally remembered everything that happened in full, and the image that was burned into his mind sent him reeling on the floor in terror. He saw her take him to a lone hotel room and sink her teeth into his neck. He felt his essence draining and his mind fog up as a paradoxically painful yet pleasant sensation engulfed him. He had been taken deep under her spell, his head an utter haze of obedience as he did not even lift a single finger to stop her. And, just as a dark black sleep was about to claim him, he heard a single phrase whispered by the woman as she stared deeply into his eyes. "Now, you can be a vampire too." Nicholas got up from his bed, his strength returning to him with an almost unnatural vigor. "You tricked me," he stated firmly. She seemed distressed. "I gave you what you wanted. You told me." "Shut up!" Nicholas snapped back at her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" He gripped his chest, acutely aware of his own lack of pulse. I don't feel anything anymore. The warmth in my body's been robbed. I was perfectly happy living my life. I had a thriving career. I was popular, successful." He looked her dead in the eyes, an increasing anger and panic in his voice. "I had everything I ever wanted, and you've taken it from me. You've ruined my life." His words practically ran a stake through her unbeating heart, though he didn't notice it. "Look, I know it's a lot to take in all at once," she said, with an almost equal amount of distress that he had, her whole mysterious demeanor melting like candle wax as a growing concern and worry engulfed her face. "But I'll always be there for you. If the changes ever become too much, I can comfort you." She desperately tried to console him. Getting closer, she went to put a hand on his shoulder, but it was quickly slapped away. "You obsessed freak," he barked at her. "I don't want anything you have to offer me." Picking up his jacket, he made a move for the door as she desperately tried to stop him. "It's nearly morning. If you go outside, you'll die." He didn't listen, throwing open the door and rushing out of the hotel room. "Where are you going?" she shouted to him. He turned around briefly and gave her a fierce glare. "Away from you." Well, that went about as well as I had expected. A voice called out from a shadowy corner of the room. Suddenly revealing himself, an older gentleman with grayish-white hair stood forward. Bearing an aristocratic garb that looked about 200 years out of date, he stood stiffly, faintly leaning on a wooden cane as his reddish eyes looked uneasily at the vampire girl. She bit her lip and turned away from him. "Don't scare me like that, Woodsworth," she said bashfully. "This isn't very good, my lady." His voice crept in as gently as he could muster it. "You turned a human, and a famous human at that." Slowly examining the scene, he meandered around the room, as if drinking in the height of his lady's folly. For her part, she meekly shrunk away from him, silently bearing every word of reproach he had as she fidgeted with a part of her dress in her hands. "Elise," Woodsworth attempted to get her attention, "your father won't be pleased. He might even have him killed." She snapped on a dime. "No, I won't allow it," she shouted, harshly turning towards him, a slight manic twitch in her eye. "At any rate," he pressed her, "as things currently stand, with him running around, he'll die within the hour." He paused for thought and leant on his cane, though perhaps that might not be so bad. It would be a clean solution to this. He stopped himself. As Elise began trying to stifle tears that kept appearing on her face, Woodsworth realized he'd gone a bit too far. "No, you're right, let's get going," he said, putting his hand on Elise's shoulder consolingly. "He'll stick out like a sore thumb. I'm sure we can find him in time."